Husky here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to use F3X in Roblox Studio. If you do not have the plugin installed, the link will be down in the description below, and you can install it that way. Another way to install the plugin is go to Home tab, Toolbox, and then go to Marketplace, and then Plugins. And it should show up in this recommended thing here, and if it doesn't, go to the search bar and search it. The creator is Gigs F3X, and make sure it is by the original creator because people tend to copy the plugins and manipulate them in a fashion that causes harm to your game, or they never get updated and they break. To install it, you click it and click install. I already have it installed. So, to access the plugin, go to the Plugins tab, and it should show up in the ribbon here, and if it does not, restart Roblox Studio. Click to open F3X. Now that we have F3X open, we can click to drag around the UIs whoever we want, including the toolbox, but you have to click on the F3X here to move it around. Note that doing this will be completely reset once you restart Roblox Studio to the default position. And with each tool, the UI is going to be in the default location, so you'd have to move each one. So I personally just keep it in the default position and only move it if it's in the way. So as I go along, there's going to be a GUI at the bottom left showing what keys I am pressing. So now to insert a new part, we hit the J key and we can click the ground to insert a new part. And it's going to take us right to the move tool. In the new part tool, we have a normal part, a truss, wedge, corner, cylinder, ball, seats, vehicle seat, and spawn. And this is handy because if I were to go to the Home tab and go to part, you only get block, sphere, wedge, and cylinder. And that is only 4 of the parts given. So where do I get the other ones, you may ask? Well, you go to Model tab, and if you see this insert object here, you'd have to go through here to insert the other parts. And you can insert spawn by clicking this button, and I honestly recommend using that spawn because the F3X spawn has wonky settings. Now go back to the move tool by pushing Z. And as you can see, the UI here has all these different options. And the first option here is increment, which is stud size. So this is the amount of studs or part of a stud that you're moving your part by. So by default is set on 1. And as you can see, I drag it, it's going by 1 stud. And then I can put 0.2. And it'll move your part by 0.2 studs. Now, you can't go and put 0, and here's why. If you put 0 and try to move it, it goes to wherever the fuck that is. I'm gonna hit F on my keyboard, and as you can see, I can't see a damn thing. I can't see a damn thing at all. I can't move, I can't do anything. So, Control Z, hit F again, and it takes you back to normal. I don't know where that abyss is, it just happens. So if you want very, very fine movement when you're using your increment size, you do 0.001 or 01, so 3 zeros, and then hit enter, and then you get the most fine movement you could possibly get. I'm going to bring this up, and I'll have a timestamp down below, so if this is not necessary for you, just skip this part. This is an issue I have encountered with F3X, and that is when I use my number pad, which is the decimal key instead of a period, I use the decimal key, and it wouldn't put the spot here, the little dot. So to fix that issue, you would need to have a software. So if you have a gaming keyboard, this should not be a problem at all, like Razer or Corsair, or even Logitech for that matter. The software will allow you to change the keys. So basically you'd have to remap your decimal key to a period. And I'll show you guys how to do that in iQ since I have a Corsair keyboard. And it'll give you a general idea with other softwares what to do, because they kind of have the same concept. If you don't have a gaming keyboard, you could get a program that allows you to change the key in registry, but it will permanently set that key to that key until you change it back. I highly do not recommend editing anything that involves your registry unless you know what you're doing, because you could potentially cause harm to your computer. So please only do it if you know what you're doing. Alright, so I have iQ opened up here, and if I go to my keyboard, there's this action section, and I don't know how the other softwares are set up besides Razer Synapse. Most of them you can just like click the key, and you can like just map it to whatever. So on iQ, you click this plus button, and you click the little decimal key on your number pad, and you can do a macro, but honestly, I prefer to just go to number and symbol keys and just set it to the period here. It'll save it to the decimal button here. And if you want to do a macro instead, all you'd have to do is hit this record button, hit your period, and then you stop it, and then there you go. You'd have a period key for your decimal. And then you can just close out of that. So now if you type, it should be able to put a decimal point here. And, well, it's a period, but you get the point. So now that we have that situated, there's these other options. So if you look down here to selection info, it says position. This right here is the X position. This one right here is the Y position, and this one's the Z position. And if I were to put 0, 0, and 0 for our XYZ position, this takes us right to the center of our world, our base plate right here. And that is a good way to find your origin point. And another useful thing with the position here is, like, if, for example, I had, let's say we have, like, a flooring or some tile or something, and our floor is, like, all uneven, right? So what we would do is we would need to figure out which position we need to move this on. And it is our Y position here, and our Y position is 9.821. So what I would do is I'd select all of these, and I'd change it to 9.821, and then bam, leveled out. So there's a lot of different uses for that. It's hard to, like, tell you every single scenario, especially in this video, because, like, that would take way too long. So the next thing is the axes we have here, and we can toggle between these by hitting our enter key, and global is our default movement. You know, it's the same as the standard moving tools too, but the others are different, however. So local, you're not going to see it if you're doing this. You're not going to see a difference, but if I go and put in one of my models, like this right here, if I put in this and I move it, it's going to give me a exploded view of my object or model here. I'm not sure what the purpose of this is for. I'm sure it could be useful for something, but I personally don't know. And then we have last. So last last is basically the last position of the part. You're moving it along that like axis. It's hard for me to kind of word, so I'll show you what I mean. So we have this diagonal wall here, and let's say we're on global. Like on global, we can't add any kind of detail to this wall because it's, well, you can, but it's a lot more difficult than if I were to use last. Because if I were to use last, I can just move it along this wall. So that allows me to copy and paste along a diagonal and move stuff along a diagonal, which makes building anything on a diagonal wall or whatever much more easier. And if like I go to global here, you can see that it just goes right through the wall. And you also could technically just do this, which will take more time, first of all, but secondly, you won't have a nice even spacing either. So the next thing is if we hit X, we get the resize tool. And the resize tool is pretty simple, straightforward, but it has the ability to rescale multiple parts at once. And if I were to go to like scale, it resizes like this. And this is not typically what you would want. You would want to rescale like this. So it allows you to build details much faster and build symmetry much faster too. So another thing we can do is we can toggle to both, which allows us to scale both sides. And this is helpful for spheres and cylinders especially. We can also change the increment size, just like the move tool. It's going to be the same. And we also have the X, Y, and Z position of our parts here, and so we can change the size to whatever we want if we want a specific size for them, which I set these to 1 by 1 by 1 size cubes. The next thing we have is the rotate tool, which you hit C to get there. And the rotate tool, it has the same like basic axis as the scale tool. It has the same axis as a scale tool, but it's called pivot. And in the rotate tool, it's by default the center. I mean, I'm pretty sure it's the same as the build tools here. Yeah, it is. So you can rotate it by the center by default. Local, it's the same as the local and the select tool. So if I put it on local on this right here, it rotates all these parts like that. I don't know again what the purpose of that is for, but yeah. Now last is the last snapping point that you have used. So I'll go over snapping here in a moment. I'll have a timestamp for that section, but just to give you a quick idea though, I could put a little snapping pivot right there and move it along that, like that. Instead of the center, I can rotate it along this corner, and if I went to this, it doesn't do that, but yeah, it's for whenever you do a snapping point. Otherwise, it's not going to really make much of a difference. Increment, that is just the angle in which you're rotating by. So like, I can rotate it. I can't rotate to 0. Once again, it will just disappear to the goddamn abyss. As you can see by this crazy-ass number here. You'd again have to do either 1 or 0.0001. And then you can move little tiny movements, but I don't really see why you would need to do that with the rotate tool. So to get to the paint tool, you'd hit V on your keyboard and pulls up the paint tool, and you can just click a color and then you can change whatever color you want the parts to be just by clicking them. And to get the custom color, you click this palette and you can change the color saturation, hue, saturation, and then brightness. Then you click check, and then you can click the parts to change it to that color. B is the surface tool. This allows you to change you can change all sides to like studs, or you could change one side to a stud or an inlet, or if you have an older place that you're trying to modernize, you can change all to smooth this way, which is much faster than going into properties and doing that. If you go to N, that gives you the material tool, which I don't use too much personally. I prefer to go to properties, but it allows you to go and change the materials, and you can change the transparency right here, which is on a scale to 0 and 1, 0 being completely opaque, 1 being completely transparent. And the same thing applies to reflectance. 0 to no reflectance to 1 complete reflectance. M is your anchored tool and unanchored tool, and you can just hit enter to toggle between the two. You just make sure you have a part selected. And F3X by default has all your parts anchored, which saves you a step from going to like part, then anchor right here. What anchor does is allow a part to either be able to fall or stay in place. So like, let me just show you guys because it's harder to explain. So I'll make 2 parts here. I'll leave this one unanchored. So this part here is unanchored, this one's anchored. Now if I go to test and I run it, this part falls. And the reason why you'd have an unanchored part is so that if you're like creating a gun or a player, it allows them to move. It allows you to have movement basically if you have unanchored parts. But obviously you don't want everything to be unanchored because it would cause a lot of lag, and also everything would be able to move. Next thing is the collision tool. By default, everything is set to collision on, which means the player cannot walk through the part or object. And if you hit enter, it toggles it off, which means the player can walk through it. So if I click play right now, so now that I'm in game, I can't go through this because collision is off, or on here, I mean. So collision off, I can walk through this wall, but with it on, I can't walk through this. And this is also used for guns and swords and such, because if you have the collision on, it causes the player to be flung or get stuck into something. So now the next thing, we've already gone over J, so we'll go to H, which is mesh tool. And I personally don't use this because the way you have to do the mesh, you'd still have to kind of do, or at least for custom meshers, you have to still go through the same process of going to model, insert object, type in mesh, and then double click, which you get this checkered mesh part right here, which I accidentally inserted it into a part. But you have this mesh part right here, it's checkered, that's how you tell it's a mesh part, and you can do like a block mesh, a cylinder, file is for custom, head mesh, sphere, and wedge. But the file is the custom mesh I'm talking about. So like, let's say I wanted to turn this wall into a mesh. I'd select it, right click it, export it, and save it as, I don't know, wall. And I'll save it. Gotta give it a moment, and then click the mesh part, and you see this little folder. You click the folder, click on wall, you open it, you are importing is very large. You like to resize the mesh, just click no. No. There is an issue. Okay, well. Okay, so now I have my mesh here, and for some reason it's textured. I'm not sure why that is, but anyways. You have a mesh ID when you do that. You get a mesh ID right here. And so you copy this number and you go down to this and you can put the mesh ID there, and then bam, you have the mesh. And then you can texturize it with a decal. So I go into my creations and I go to decal. And then I click on a decal and I double click the number, Control C, and then I can Control V the texture ID, and then bam, I texturize the mesh. But I don't see the point of doing it that way though, because you still have to go and get a mesh part to do this, and you can still texturize it in the Explorer. So let me clear this all out real quick. Now, the next thing is G, which is our texturizing tool. And you'd add a decal, so I already have a decal pulled up. You grab the decal and you put the image ID in. And the decal is just going to be on one side, same with texture. But yeah, you put in a texture. I'm gonna put this on the top, actually. And you can change the texture transparency and like the size the texture appears on the part, which is the repeat here. And then transparency. And again, I don't really do that because you can just go into Explorer, click the plus, and you can either click decal, texture, and do all that here. But that's just your user preference, honestly. But the next thing is J. No, not J. My bad. F, which isn't the best shortcut, to be honest, because F takes you to the point of the part, or like it teleports your camera to a part. So you'd have to click off to go to it of everything. And it gives you the weld tool, which welding is for welding unanchored parts together. So like if you're making a vehicle or something, you'd weld the parts together so they kind of stick together. I personally don't know how to do that very well, so I can't really show you how to do that, unfortunately. I typically use a weld script for like my guns, so I don't really need to do that. So the next thing we have here is our light tool. And actually I probably should bring these up. Spread these out. And I'm going to turn the lighting to nighttime so you guys can see this better. But hit U, and you have spotlight, point light, and surface light. And then you can click add. I'm going to add each one to different part. And you go to this drop down and you get all these settings. You can change the color. Like, let's give this one a blue light. And you can change the angle. I'm going to move it to the bottom. And then I'm going to change the brightness to like 2. Range is the distance the light goes, and you can go to a max of 60. Angle is the angle in which the light shines. To get the widest view or light range, you do like 180. And if you do shadows, it gives you a level of realism. So if I put this part here, you can see that the light does not shine through the wall, and if I turn the shadows off, the light shines through the wall. And it's honestly better to have it not shine through the wall because it is more realistic. So point light here is a light that shines all around a part. So if I were to like cage it in real quick, okay, so if I cage it in, you can see that the light hits all of the walls, whereas the point light, actually I need to make this taller so that you can see what I'm talking about easier. Let's change the range to this to like 10. And you can see it's lighting up all around this part, top, bottom, and sides. Whereas the spotlight, if you think of it, it's like think about it, it's kind of like a street light. So it's going to like shine the point downward, as you can see here. So that's the difference between the two. And of course you can change the color and the brightness and do the shadows just the same. And then surface light. Surface light is lighting up a whole surface. So I'm going to change this to red. And I'm going to change the range to 60 as well. 180. And then bottom. And as you can see, the amount of stretching I do, it is scaling along with it. If I take the point or spotlight, I cannot do the same. The light will move, but it will not rescale to the size of the surface light, as you can see here. So that's the difference between all three of those lights. I'm going to switch back to daytime. And I'm going to put in another new part, actually 3. And if I go to P, that takes us to our decorate tool. So that allows us to add smoke, fire, and sparkles. Sparkles, all you can do is adjust the colors. And the sparkles, it uses a particle emitter, which I will go over that in another video. The fire, you can change the base color, so I'm going to change that to like a blue. And you can change the top color, which I'm going to change to a green. And heat, that is the height in which the flame burns. And then the size is the width of the flame. And then smoke, you can change the color of the smoke. I'm going to just go with the gray color, and you can change how thick the smoke is. It can be very faint, or it can be very heavy smoke. The size is going to be, I believe, the particle size, which makes it appear as a bigger cloud of smoke. And then the velocity is the speed in which it moves at, which gives you a bigger, like, smoke effect. And the reason for that is because the particles of smoke, if you adjust their size and the velocity, depending on the size and the velocity, the smoke is either going to move up fast. Here, let me just show you. It's hard for me to explain. See, if I put velocity at 25 and the size at 1, you get these little puffs of smoke. And since the velocity is up high, the particles go up much higher, and each particle has like a lifetime. So the faster you have your particles going, the higher they can go. And if I make the particles bigger, it gives you a more like you know, thicker cloud of smoke and all that. So that is all the tools explained. Now for the shortcut. So you can, to undo, you'd hit Control Z. To redo is Control Shift Z. And to rotate is Control R. To tilt is Control T. To duplicate, you hit Shift C, and it'll duplicate a part in place. Another way to duplicate would be Control D, and that is up to your preference on which of those you use. Control X is to cut. Control V is to paste. And cutting basically saves your whatever you deleted to the clipboard to paste later, but if you copy something else, it'll go away. Control C to Control V to copy and paste. Now the next thing is the most important thing that F3X has to offer, the most useful thing too. And this is something that is often overlooked by just about anybody that uses F3X. And I even did. But it has a snapping feature. It used to tell you by clicking the question mark, but it doesn't anymore. But to do the snapping feature is you hold down R on your keyboard, and you get this pink X, and you can just move your mouse around, and it will move the X around to each of the points. And you can click the corners, centers of each part, and you click the point in which you want to snap by, and you click and you drag it, and it snaps together. And you can do this also with the rescale tool, but you can't do it from the center. You can only do it from the corners, and you can snap it just by holding R and dragging. And you don't have to have it in front of it either. It could be to the side, like that. And also, you can use the snapping feature for your rotate tool. So if you hold R and hover over the point you want to rotate by, I want to rotate by this corner, you can let go once the rotate tool moves. That's how you know you did it right. And you can rotate along that pivot, that point there. And then we can grab this and then snap it to the top, and then we have a quick ramp there, which would take you much longer to do with the basic building tools. And just to give you a little idea, I'll show you. Okay, so that took me probably about 30 to 40 seconds, but if you look here, I could fiddle with this even longer, but if you look here, there's a gap, or actually it's like just slightly too high there, and then like here, there's a little bit of a gap. And then if you look at the F3X, none whatsoever. Perfectly clean. So you save a lot more time by doing using the F3X tool. There's some points in which it like is almost necessary to have, because there's like certain angles that's like very like awkward to use. And another thing to keep in mind when you're building is that angle does matter when you're doing the snapping feature, because sometimes it may not cooperate with you, so you have to like angle your camera right to get it to do the thing you want it to do. So you'll have to just mess around with that. And the last thing I want to show you is let's say you like to build in a building game. So one that I'm familiar with is whimsical building. Okay, so I've loaded up whimsical building, and we got like all these different like portals. You just step into one, takes you into a world. This one's pretty bright. I'm gonna go to a darker one. Okay, so you have all these like options basically, but anyways, you get an in-game version of F3X. So I'm gonna build just like a little something here. Okay, so I built this little, I don't know, box. And let's just say I'm just super happy with this box, but I'm not done with it. I want to do more to this little box, or I want to use it in game. Well, what you would do is you would select this box, and you'll click this little box with the arrow, and it gives you a little creation ID number. And this number is something you want to save, so I would just screenshot it with your little snipping tool. And then you can close out of the game. And I'll have a link for this down in the description too. But you get an import from Building Tools plugin. And our little ID number is 21 and 8. So we do 21 and 8. And then import it. And we can click F, and it teleports us right to it. And it's gonna be like way off of base plate because of like the position of the world that you built it. Okay, so once you import it, you just have to look for these orbs, and you can just drag it to you, and there you go, you have your build. It's exactly how I left it in game. And that's how you'd get a build from game to studio. Anyways, I hope this helps, and if you have any questions, leave a comment down below, or you can go to my Reddit page or Discord server. I have a help desk section in each, and you can ask questions there, or you can show your creations and all that stuff there.